What's going on, guys? Matt from the Trojan Brotherhood, and after 3 years under the Lincoln Riley era, I think it is fair to say that it has been a failure so far. But with that being said, following 2 underwhelming years, I think that oddly enough, the program is in a fairly good spot, considering the fact that you have constructed a great front office, obviously with a great athletic director, Jen Cohen, and you just hired Chad Bowden to be your new GM, which I love for this program. And also, you constructed what I consider to be the best defensive staff in the country. And so it seems like a lot of the problems we saw early in Lincoln Riley's program in the first 2 years are beginning to be fixed. Like the defense, obviously. And also, what I think is really important is him sacrificing some control of the program and, more importantly, of the roster construction to Chad Bowden, which I think will be huge for the Trojans. So going into year 4, I want to evaluate what are the realistic expectations for this year, and also touch on where us Trojan fans thought we would be in year 4 under Lincoln Riley when we first hired him. And then lastly, I want to talk about what type of season Lincoln Riley would have to have in order to be officially on the hot seat and eventually maybe even be fired. Now, I want to start with where USC should have been in year 4, where when we first hired him and after that first year, where we thought we'd be in the 4th year under Lincoln Riley and just what we expected. And I think that's a playoff berth. We are USC, a blue blood with one of the highest paid coaches in the sport, one of the best coaching staffs, a GM, and one of the best recruiting bases in the country. And as a fan base with all of that and all of the history of USC, I think anything but a playoff appearance is a failure of a season, considering the fact that it's 12 teams. I mean, SMU made the playoffs last year, for God's sakes. And so now looking at these expectations, we should answer the question, is this actually where we are? And if we're being honest with ourselves, no, that's not. Now, that's not to say it's not possible. I do 100% think it's very possible to end up one of the 12 best teams in the country, but when we first hired him, we expected by his 4th year that this would be a given, that every single year we will finish as one of the 12 best teams in the country. And right now, it just kind of seems like the possibility, the ceiling of this team to reach the playoffs. And the floor is realistically, we're looking at 6 to 7 wins. And looking at a couple of programs which I despise with every bone in my body, of course I'm talking about Notre Dame and Oregon. For those programs, there is no doubt. It seems like every year they're going to be one of the 12 best teams. And there is no reason why we should not be right there with them, if not even better than those two programs. But with that being said, I do think there is a path to a 10-2 season where we do make the playoffs. But like I said, that's the ceiling. The question we got to answer is, how realistic is it? Because when you think about it, last year with all the problems involved, the ceiling for that team was the playoffs. I mean, you look at I believe it was 5 of the 6 losses. We actually had a lead in the 4th quarter. I mean, if those go our way, we're a 10-2 playoff team. So the ceiling was a playoff team. What did we end up? We ended up 6-6. So just because it's possible to make the playoffs, it's definitely not a given, which is where we thought we'd be. So how realistic is it for this team to make the playoffs? For me, I'm looking at 3 things that we need to do in order to make the playoffs. Last year on these 3 things, we went 0 for 3. So to me, the first thing where it all starts is the spring portal, because you have massive holes that you got to address. And at the very least, I would love a lot more, but I don't want to be realistic. At the very least, you need a starting left guard, a starting linebacker, preferably a starting corner, but at the very least, some depth at corner, some depth at receiver, and the defensive line. That is number 1. There's holes on the roster. Address that with the spring portal. And second, and most importantly, so important that I made a whole video on this, you need to change the identity of this football team and become a run-first team. With the quarterbacks you have, with the running backs you have, with the conference you play in, there's no questions that need to be asked about what kind of offense this needs to be. It needs to be a running football team. But third and finally, I think average to good play out of the quarterback position, whether it is Maeva, whether it is Husan Longstreet. And it sounds crazy to ask for average quarterback play, but really what I mean is limit the crucial turnovers. Because if you look at last year, every single loss had a crucial interception, and whether it was a pick 6 like Notre Dame or Michigan, or that costly turnover in the Penn State game, every single loss had a turnover from the quarterback position, and that is something that we just cannot have this year. And so looking at these three things, all of them are reasonable and realistic. But so far in the Lincoln Riley era, none of these things have come easy. Especially last year, like I said, we went 0 for 3 in this regard. The spring portal, we knew, everyone knew. That right tackle is a hole. Mason Murphy cannot start at right tackle. We just didn't address it. We didn't address the defensive line either. So the spring portal was terrible. Then Lincoln Riley cost us multiple games by not being willing to run the ball and make this identity a running football team. So that's 0 for 2. And like I said earlier, the third one, every single loss had a turnover. And so if we had capitalized on these three things, we addressed the right tackle position, we addressed the defensive line, and more importantly, we ran the football in that Washington game. More importantly, we didn't have a turnover, that pick six throwing to Will Johnson in Michigan. We didn't turn the ball over and overthrow 6'6" Deuce Robinson in the red zone in Penn State. If those things don't happen, we're literally a playoff team. So that is why I value these three things, as random as they may sound. If we can do these three things, I promise you we will be a playoff team in 2025. But the reason this is kind of scary, because think about what we're asking. We're asking Lincoln Riley, who's incredibly stubborn and loves to trust his quarterback, to be a run-first football team. And number two, we're asking either a freshman or Jaden Mayava to not turn the ball over. That's a little bit tricky to believe in. But no matter what, I'm going to believe in this team. I do think that it's possible. And let's just pray for all Trojan fans' sake that this does happen. Now, when talking about the subject of Lincoln Riley's job security, I may have a hot take, because a lot of people are talking about if he doesn't win 10 games, he needs to be fired. If he doesn't win 9 games, he needs to be fired. If he doesn't make the playoffs, he needs to be fired. They have this set expectation for him. I personally don't. It's not Lincoln Riley has to make the playoffs or he has to go. For me, it's more about the process of the season. And what I mean by that is, if Lincoln Riley costs us football games because he refuses to run the ball when he needs to go. If Lincoln Riley doesn't call a timeout when he needs to and wastes 40 seconds of the clock, he needs to go. If Lincoln Riley has the ball in the fourth quarter and throws it 3 times, he needs to go. That is what I care more about, because that's something we'll never get over, because our head coach refuses to change. Our head coach continues to make crucial mistakes that hurt the team. That we cannot get over. But if we lose, if we go 9-3 and miss playoffs, but we fall short, we have a few heartbreaking losses to really good football teams, maybe it's on the road, does he really need to be fired because we didn't make the playoffs? To me, the answer is no, because like I said, if the process is correct, he's running the ball, no crucial mistakes, but we lose maybe because of a freshman hiccup from Husan Longstreet at Oregon or at Notre Dame. That's a process that needs to happen, and you have 2 more years of Husan Longstreet. To me, that doesn't sound like, okay, Lincoln Riley needs to be fired because he didn't make the playoffs. I care more about the process of how this program is moving. And it may sound like I'm trying to defend him, but I promise it's not. The reason I feel this way is because if he does do damage in the portal, he has a great spring portal class. He does change the identity of his team. He realizes, no, we need to run the ball. And he does improve his game management. With this schedule, there's no way we have a 7-5 type of season. If he does those 3 things and we win 7 games, I would be beyond shocked. Because with a tougher schedule and a worse football team, the Washington game, Michigan, Maryland, and Penn State games all should have been wins. But poor game management and turnovers from the quarterback position cost us. So if he can fix that with a better roster and weaker schedule, I think at the very least we're looking at a 9-3 season. But very likely a playoff and double-digit win season. But we can talk all we want about Lincoln Riley, the potential of this team, the schedule we're going to face. Everything comes down to this spring portal. This is going to be, like I said, the most important transfer portal cycle of Lincoln Riley's career. And I'm going to be covering this every step of the way, potential targets, every single player we do actually acquire. So stay tuned for that. And stay tuned for all things Trojans. If you're a Trojan fan, this is the place to be. I'll have some podcasts and breakdowns when we get to the season. So stay tuned. Thank you so much for watching, and fight on.